My son stood in my kitchen. The kitchen, I have made coffee in every morning for 31 years and told me it would be easier for everyone if I moved my things into the guest room so the baby could have the big room down the hall, the master, my room. He said it gently, the way you'd suggest a senior citizen hand over the car keys, and his wife Sloane nodded along behind him, with her palm resting on the curve of her belly, like she was already measuring the walls for a crib. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I said, "Of course, sweetheart, whatever's easiest," and I poured him a second cup, and I went to bed early. What none of them knew, sitting there so sure about whose room was whose, was that the house they were rearranging me out of had only ever had one name on the deed. Mine. And that wasn't even the worst thing the two of them were hiding that night. By the time Mark came down for breakfast the next morning, rubbing his eyes, asking what smelled like cinnamon, there was already a sign company on its way, and an agent I'd known for 20 years, pulling comps in her car in my driveway. Here's how a woman. They tried to file away in the small room, listed the whole house before the eggs were cold, and what fell out of my son's marriage, when the family finally read the one document none of them had ever bothered to look at. Stay with me to the end. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. My name is Eleanor Hartley. Most people call me Nell. I'm 67, and for 38 years I sold houses in this county. I know what a home is worth the way some people know the weather in my bones. Before I check, I've sat across closing tables from nervous young couples and from sharp-elbowed investors, and both taught me the same thing. A house does not care who feels entitled to it. A house answers to the name on the deed, not the loudest voice in the kitchen. I built a quiet, solid life out of that one piece of knowledge. I raised one boy, mostly alone, because his father Ray worked construction and was gone before dawn and home after dark, and the raising fell to me. I made the down payment on this very house out of my own commissions in 1994. Back when a woman in a blazer carrying a lockbox key was still a novelty, people felt free to underestimate. I've been underestimated my whole life, and I stopped minding a long time ago. Being underestimated is its own kind of cover. People say things in front of a woman they've decided is harmless that they'd never say in front of someone they thought was watching. My daughter-in-law said a great many things in front of me. So did my son. I was listening to every word. Let me tell you about Ray, because everything starts and ends with Ray. My husband died 14 months before the morning of the guest room. 41 years of marriage, and then a cough that wouldn't quit, and then a scan, and then 4 months that went faster than 4 months has any right to go. Ray was not a man of speeches. He was a man of hands. He built the deck out back, board by board, and hung every door in this house so true you could close them with a breath. People who came to my open houses over the years would run their palms down Ray's banister and go quiet. That banister is the closest thing to a love letter my husband ever wrote me. And here is the thing about this house that my son never understood, because we never made a point of explaining it. When Ray and I bought it, his credit was a wreck. Construction is feast and famine, and he'd carried debt from a partner who ran off, owing everyone in town. The bank wouldn't touch a loan with his name near it. But I had a license, a steady draw, and a stack of commission checks. So the mortgage went in my name. The title went in my name. Ray signed a quitclaim the lawyer recommended, smiling, not minding one bit, because Ray never once confused who held the paper with who held the marriage. "Keep it in your name, Nell," he told me at that signing. And he said it again the last clear week of his life, holding my hand in a hospital bed. "Keep the house in your name. It's the one thing nobody will ever be able to talk you out of." I didn't understand at the time why a dying man would spend one of his last good sentences on a deed. I understand now. Ray could see further down the road than I could. He'd watched our son grow into a man who loved easy more than he loved right. He'd watched the woman that man married. And I think Ray knew exactly what was coming for me long before I let myself know it. Keep the house in your name, Nell. It's the one thing nobody will ever be able to talk you out of, because Mark grew up calling this the house Dad built. In his heart, I think he'd already inherited it. He'd walked these rooms his whole life, believing they would be his someday, the way you believe the sun comes up. It never once occurred to him to check whose name was actually on the deed. Why would it? Checking would have meant admitting he wasn't certain. And my son has never in his life gone, looking for a fact that might disturb a comfortable assumption. I need to be fair to Mark, because the part of this that still aches isn't Sloane, it's him. Mark is not a cruel man. He's a weak one, and those are different things, though they can do the same damage. He's gentle and funny, and he cried harder than anyone at his father's funeral. He has also spent his whole life choosing the path with the least friction. And somewhere along the way, he married a woman who took that softness and turned it into a steering wheel. Sloane. I don't want to make her a cartoon, because the truth is sadder than a cartoon. Sloane grew up with not very much, and decided, the way some people do, that the cure was to look like she'd always had plenty. She curates. The apartment they had before they moved in with me was a magazine spread. No one was allowed to actually live in. When she got pregnant, the baby became the next project, the designer nursery, the registry full of brands I couldn't pronounce. Underneath all of it, I think Sloane is frightened the way people are when they've decided their whole worth is on display and could be repossessed at any moment. And frightened people grab. They look around a room for the thing that would make them feel safe, and they reach for it, and they tell themselves a story about why they deserve it. They reached for my house, and as I'd find out, they had a much harder reason to than I knew. It started, the way these things always start dressed up as help. 14 months ago, right after the funeral, Mark and Sloane were between leases, and I was a brand new widow rattling around 4 bedrooms alone, and it made all the sense in the world for them to move in. Just for a while, Mom, just till we're back on our feet. I was grateful. I'll say that plainly. Those first weeks, having them here was the only thing that got me out of bed. Sloane wasn't unkind in the beginning. She was careful with me, the way you're careful with something you're not sure is fragile. Then the baby arrived on a test strip, and everything shifted. It shifts so slowly, you don't see it happening. First, Ray's old recliner was a lot, wasn't it? And wouldn't a smaller chair open up the space? Then the hall photos of Mark growing up came down and got safely stored for the nursery vibe. Then my good dishes went into a cabinet I couldn't reach, replaced with a set Sloane liked better. My kitchen, where I'd made 31 years of breakfasts, slowly stopped being a place I recognized. I'd reach for the coffee, and it had moved. I'd go to sit in my spot, and there'd be a folded muslin blanket on it. I told myself it was nesting. I told myself a pregnant woman gets to feather her nest. I told myself the thing every decent parent tells themselves. It's not about me. Don't make it about me. Just be glad they're here. That's the trap. That's the exact trap. They count on your love to make you swallow your own erasure. They count on you being too good a mother to make a scene. And your decency becomes the leash they walk you on. I'd been on that leash for 14 months, and calling it grace. And then came the guest room. It was a Thursday. Mark had that careful look on his face all through dinner, the one he gets when he's been handed a message he didn't write. Sloane kept touching his arm. After the plates were cleared, and isn't it always after the plates are cleared? When they think you're softened up, Mark cleared his throat. Mum, Sloane and I have been talking about the layout. With the baby coming, we really need the big room. The crib, the changing table, there's just more space in there. And honestly, the guest room's really cozy. You'd have your own bathroom right off it. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. 3 words that have moved more people out of their own lives than any eviction notice ever printed. I looked at Sloane, whose hand was on her belly, already arranging furniture in a room that was mine. And I felt something I hadn't felt in 14 months of fog. I felt the fog burn off. but I didn't show it. 38 years of holding my face still, while a buyer lowballed me to my teeth, taught me how to do that. I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart," I said. "Whatever's easiest. Let me sleep on it, and we'll sort out the rooms." Mark exhaled, like I'd let him off a hook. Sloane actually smiled at me, warm for the first time in weeks, the warmth of a person who just got what she wanted. "Thank you, Eleanor," she said. "It really is better for everyone. Better for everyone." I went up to bed in the master my room, Ray's and my room, the room where my husband had held my hand and told me to keep the house in my name, and I lay in the dark. And I didn't sleep, not yet, because the house was old and the heating vents carried sound the way they always had, and through the floor I could hear them in the kitchen below me, low, pleased with themselves. And what I heard turned the whole thing from a hurt into a map. "She took it fine," Mark said. "I told you she would." "Once she's in the guest room, it's basically done," Sloane said. "We get the place looking how it should, and when it's time, the assisted living conversation is so much easier when she's already used to one room. People transition. It's kinder, actually." "And the house?" Mark, quieter. "The house is the house," Sloane said. "It comes to you eventually, Mark. It's your dad's house. We just need to not let it sit. The second it's ours, we refinance. We pull what we need. The Voss people are off our backs, and nobody ever has to know how bad it got. Your mother's 70. We just have to be patient and not let her do anything weird with it before then." The Voss thing. I didn't know yet what the Voss thing was. I'd find out. But I knew enough, lying in that bed, to understand three things at once. The way you see the bottom of a lake when the surface finally goes still. My son and his wife were not drowning quietly out of pride. They were drowning in debt. And they'd looked at a paid-off house and a 70-year-old widow and seen a life raft. The guest room was not the end of a plan. It was the first move of one, and the last move was a brochure and a watercolor class I'd never take. And every part of it rested on a single assumption they'd never once checked, that the house was theirs to come, that it would simply pass to Mark. It would not. The deed had one name on it, and these two had just told me through a heating vent, thinking I was asleep, exactly how much they were counting on something that was never true. I didn't cry. I'd planned to, I think, when I went up those stairs. Instead, something rose up clean and cold and clarifying. The feeling I get right before I do something I've decided is right. Certainty. Somewhere around 2 a.m, lying in the room they wanted to take, I made a decision, and the moment I made it, I slept like a stone. If you've ever been told, in your own home, by the people you fed and raised, that you'd be more convenient somewhere smaller if you've ever heard them, just once, talking about you as a problem to be managed instead of a mother to be loved, then you know the particular cold that comes after. It isn't rage. Rage is loud, and it makes mistakes. This is the other thing, the stillness. If that stillness is familiar to you, stay with me, because this is where it turns. And if you believe a person's home and a person's dignity are not up for a family vote, hit subscribe so the next chapter finds you. I was up before 5. I've always been an early riser. 38 years of beating other agents to the good listings. We'll do that. I made coffee in the dark, in my own kitchen, and I moved every dish and every photo back where it belonged, just for the quiet pleasure of it. Then I sat at the table with my phone, and I went to work. The first call was to Diane. Diane and I have been in this business together 2 decades. She came up under me when she was green, and she's one of the few people I'd trust with a key to an empty house. She answered on the second ring, because agents are always awake. "Nell, it's 5:15. Who died?" "Nobody," I said. "I'm listing a house today. I need comps, and I need a sign in the yard before noon." A pause. Diane knows me. She didn't ask if I was sure. She asked, "Which house?" "Mine," I said. "The Maple House, The one in my name. On it, she said. 7 o'clock, paperwork in hand. Photographer or pocket-listed quiet. I thought about Sloane's golden wheat field, all that performance. Quiet first, I said. I already know who'd want it. And I did. I'd sold 3 houses on this street over the years, and I knew a young couple, the Okonkwo's, who'd been hunting this exact neighborhood for 2 years and kept losing out good people, the kind who'd actually love Ray's Bannister. Then I made the second call, the one that mattered more. I left a message for Carol Bishop, my lawyer, who's handled my affairs since before Ray got sick, to ring me the minute her office opened. Because I'd decided to do far more than sell a house. I was going to finally do the thing Ray had been quietly telling me to do for 14 months. Put my whole estate in order, locked, in a way no reasonable-sounding sentence at any dinner table could ever bend. And then I made breakfast, because I am still their mother and I make breakfast. Mark came down at 7:40, drawn by the cinnamon, and the first thing he saw through the window was Diane walking the perimeter with her phone out, photographing the eaves. "Mom, who's that in the yard?" "That's Diane," I said, sliding French toast onto a plate. "An old colleague. Sit, eat." He sat, but kept glancing at the window. Sloane came down in her robe, clocked the car and the woman in the blazer, and something behind her eyes went sharp. "Is everything all right?" she asked, in that bright voice people use when they're certain it isn't. "More than fine," I said. Then it came from the front yard, the metallic ring of a post driven into the ground. Mark went to the window. Sloane was right behind him. And there, in the strip of lawn Ray had seeded by hand, a crew was setting a sign into the earth. "For sale." Below it, the rider. "Eleanor Hartley. Broker." Mark turned around very slowly. "Mom, why is there a for sale sign in our yard?" "In my yard," I said, pleasant as Sunday, topping off his coffee. "Because I'm selling the house." For 1 second, nobody moved. Sloane's hand flew to her belly. Mark's mouth worked without sound, the way it did when he was a boy, and the world stopped making sense. You can't sell the house." He got out. "This is Dad's house. This is our house." "This is my house," I said. I set the pot down. "It has been my house since 1994. The deed carries exactly one name, and it isn't your father's, and it certainly isn't yours. You told me Wednesday it would be easier for everyone if I moved into the smaller room, so I gave it some thought. And I decided the simplest thing of all is for me to move into a house that's the right size for one woman and let the 2 of you find a place that's the right size for 3. I picked my coffee back up. "I'm a very practical person, Mark. You should know that about me by now." "You can't be serious," Sloane said, her voice climbing. "We live here. I'm 7 months pregnant. Where are we supposed to go?" "That," I said gently, "is an excellent question to ask before you tell someone to move into the guest room, whose house it actually is. I'd have thought a woman who plans as carefully as you do would have checked the deed before she picked paint colors for my bedroom." She had no answer for that. She wouldn't have one for quite some time. Mark had gone pale, the floor disappearing look. "It's not about the room," I told him before he could start. The room was only the part I couldn't unsee. There were 100 small ones first. My pictures off the wall, your father's chair gone. My dishes up where I can't reach them. I've been turned into a guest in my own home, one polite little adjustment at a time. And Wednesday night, the 2 of you finally said out loud what you'd decided months ago, that this is your house, and I'm in the way of it. I held his eyes. "I'm not in anyone's way anymore." "You're punishing us," Sloane said. And there it was, the pivot to victim, fast as a reflex. "You're punishing me over a bedroom while I'm pregnant. Do you understand how cruel this is?" "I understand it doesn't feel fair," I said. "A lot of true things don't feel fair to the person they land on. Now sit and eat, both of you. We have a great deal to sort out, And you don't do hard things on an empty stomach. Neither of them ate. Diane came in with the listing agreement, read the room in one glance, and set the papers on the counter, away from the table. Whenever you're ready, Nell. I signed in front of all of them, Eleanor Hartley, my own clean hand, the only signature on the only document that ever mattered. And I watched my son watch me sign away his comfortable assumption. And I won't pretend a part of my heart didn't crack as I did it. He's my boy. But Ray was right. Some lessons a person can only learn one way. The campaign started before noon, not from Mark, from Sloane, and then from people she recruited. Eleanor, I really think you're making a rash decision in a vulnerable time. An hour later, grief makes people do things they regret. Please don't do this to Mark. By evening, Sloane's own mother, a woman I'd met exactly twice, had left a voicemail saying she was so concerned about your state of mind. Dear. By the next morning, my sister Joanne called, rattled, asking carefully whether I'd talked to anybody before deciding to sell. I recognized the shape of it, the way you recognize a contract you've read 100 times. This was not a family, worried about a grieving widow. This was a record being built. Vulnerable, rash, grief, state of mind. Those aren't the words of people checking on you. Those are exhibits, lined up the way you line up exhibits before a hearing. Sloane wasn't pleading with me. She was documenting me, so that when the real move came, enough people would already believe the verdict. I'd watched it happen once, years ago, to a client I was fond of. A tidy paper trail of incidents that by the end described a decline that never happened. I knew the playbook, and I knew the only thing that beats it, not noise, not tears, not a fight that makes you look exactly as unstable as they're claiming. Clean paper and a calm voice. I found out who was holding the pen on a Tuesday, in the cereal aisle of the grocery store. I'd gone for the oat milk Joanne likes, and I heard Sloane 2 aisles over, not bothering to lower her voice, the way people don't when they've decided the person they're discussing is already gone. No, the doctor route is cleaner than fighting her on the sale, she was saying. If we can get her looked at, get it on paper that she's not all there, the listing actually helps us. A confused old woman trying to sell a house out from under her own family? That's the picture, that's the story that writes itself. A pause. Then, lower, tighter. Because we're 3 months behind, that's why. Because if Mark's name was on that deed, we'd have refinanced it in February and the Voss people would be off our backs. We just have to slow her down till the house is ours. I stood very still by the oat milk, and the last piece slid into place. The Voss people. A debt, a real one, a failed business of Mark's. I learned later, money he'd borrowed from men who do not send concerned text messages. They weren't entitled rich kids playing house. They were 2 frightened people 3 months behind, on a debt that scared them. And they'd looked at a paid-off house and a 70-year-old widow and seen a life raft they'd simply assumed was theirs to climb into. When Sloane came around the end cap and nearly ran her cart into mine, her face did something I'll remember a long time. Eleanor, she said. I didn't. How long have you? Long enough, I said. I put the oat milk in my cart. You should be careful, Sloane, talking like that in a store. You never know who reads her own mail. And I rolled my cart to the register with my hands perfectly steady, and inside, something had gone very quiet and very clear. They didn't just want the big room, they wanted me, declared. And they'd been counting the whole time on a deed that would never have their name on it. Most people, finding that out, would have driven home and set it on fire in the driveway. I understand the urge. I felt it in my hands on the wheel. But I'd seen how that goes. You fight a lie with noise, and the noise becomes their next exhibit. See how erratic she is. See how unstable. They had a story. And a man in a nice voice telling Sloane how these things are done. What I had was the one thing they kept forgetting. I know how paper works. So I went to see Carol Bishop. I told her everything at her conference table. The guest room, the vent, the Voss people, the cereal aisle, the chorus of concern about my state of mind. Carol didn't gasp or pat my hand. She's 71 and does not suffer foolishness. She got out a legal pad. They're laying groundwork for a capacity petition, she said flatly. Clumsy, but it's groundwork. So we make it impossible. She slid a card across the table, a board-certified geriatrician. First, a full cognitive evaluation. Dated. Signed. So if anyone ever breathes the word competent in a courtroom, you hand the judge one page that ends the conversation. I took the test 3 days later. 2 hours of it memory, judgment, clock drawings, numbers backward, the kind of test that has no mercy and no favorites. The report came back exactly as I knew it would. Cognition intact across all domains, no impairment, sealed and dated. Then Carol and I locked the rest down a revocable trust, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare directive. Every asset I owned moved behind a wall the law won't let anyone climb. And the people I named to stand in for me, if I ever truly couldn't, were not Mark and not Sloane. They were my sister Joanne, who'd heard the whole story and turned, furious, onto my side, and Carol herself. Then I did the part that mattered most, the part that wasn't about protecting myself at all. Because there was an innocent in all of this. A baby, due in 2 months, who hadn't done a single thing wrong, who was going to grow up in whatever house his frightened, grasping parents could afford, learning whatever they had to teach him. That baby was my grandchild, Ray's grandchild, and whatever I thought of the 2 people making him, I was not going to let him pay for them. So I set up a second trust, for the baby. A real one, locked, funded with a good piece of what the house would bring money for his education, his start in life, administered independently. Money his parents could not spend, borrow against, or hand to anyone named Voss. The child's, and only the child's. Ray would have wanted that. Ray thought in decades. A man who builds a banister so it'll outlast him is building for grandchildren he hasn't met. I was going to finish what he started. The Okonkwo's walked the house on the 4th day, quietly, while Mark and Sloane were out. The young husband ran his hand down Ray's banister, stopped, and asked, "Who did this work?" I said, "My husband," and had to look out the window a moment. They made a full asking offer before they reached the front door, cash strong, fast close. A 30-day rent back, so I'd have time to find my own place. I accepted that afternoon. By the time my son got home, the house he'd spent his whole life assuming was his, was in every way that mattered, already sold. I gathered the family for a Sunday dinner before the closing. I'll tell you why. Because it's the whole heart of the thing. I could have let the lawyers handle it and let Mark and Sloane learn it from a notice in the mail. But I didn't want it to land as a cold transaction. I wanted my son to see it, all of it, laid out one item at a time, in the light so he could never later tell himself a comfortable story about what happened. Some lessons have to be witnessed to take. They came on a Sunday into a house that smelled like the pot roast I'd made, because some weapons are kindness. Mark, grey and quiet. Sloane, polished again, wary, her belly leading her into the room. Joanne, who'd come early to stand at my shoulder. And Carol, reachable by phone, though I didn't say so. We ate first, I insisted. You don't do the hard thing on an empty stomach, and I wanted no one able to claim afterward they'd been ambushed. We talked about the baby. It was almost pleasant. Sloane even thanked me for the roast and seemed surprised to mean it. Then I cleared the plates, and I sat back down, and I set a cedar document box on the table. Ray's old box, the one that still smells faintly of his workshop, and I rested my hand flat on the lid. Before this closes, I said, I want to do this properly, where you can see it with your own eyes. Everyone in this family has been told one version of these 2 weeks. The version where a grieving, confused old woman made a rash decision and sold her son's house out from under him. I'd like to show you the other version, not shouted, not in a text, right here, on paper. And then you can all decide for yourselves who in this room actually needs looking after. Mark's jaw tightened. Sloane went carefully blank. I opened the box and laid the documents out one at a time, slow and deliberate, the way a banker counts out a fortune, which is exactly what I was doing. This, I said, setting down the first page, is the deed to this house, recorded in 1994. Grantee, Eleanor Hartley. One name. There has never been a second name on it. Not your father's, not yours, Mark. I made the down payment from my own commissions, and I've paid every mortgage payment and every tax bill for 31 years. This was never the house Dad built for you. It's the house I bought that your father built things inside of because he loved me. I smoothed it flat. You grew up so sure it would be yours that you never once thought to check. That's not a crime. But it is the root of everything that happened in this kitchen and everything you were counting on that I heard through that vent. Sloane's head came up at that. I let her wonder how much I'd heard. I set down the next page. This is the listing agreement, signed by the sole owner. This is a full asking offer from a lovely family who close in 3 weeks. Sloane made a small sound. And this, I laid down the sealed report like something delicate, is a complete cognitive evaluation, dated last week, signed by a board-certified physician. Cognition intact, no impairment. I bring it tonight because certain people have been very busy on the phones, telling our relatives, I'm losing my mind. I looked at Sloane, not unkindly. I'm in my right mind, dear. That has been the whole problem all along. The silence had a texture to it now. Then the last documents. This is a trust and a power of attorney, signed 2 weeks ago. Every dollar I own now lives behind it. And this, I touched the final folder gently, is a separate trust for the baby. A good piece of what this house brings is going into it, locked, for his schooling and his start. His parents cannot spend it, borrow against it, or settle anyone's debts with it. It's his, the way his grandfather wanted. I looked at my son. Your father saved for people who didn't exist yet, Mark. I'm finishing the job. Not 1 cent of it will ever reach the Voss people, in case that was the next thing anyone hoped to ask me for. Mark went white. He hadn't known I knew the name. Now he knew I knew everything. And Sloane did what Sloane does. She reached instantly for the version where she was the wronged party. You can't put this on us, she said, voice rising. How were we supposed to know the deed was only in your name? Who keeps a thing like that secret? You let us move in, you let me plan a nursery, you let me get attached to that room, and now you rip it away to teach us a lesson. That's a trap. You set us up. I didn't set anyone up, Sloane, I said, still calm. I let my son and his pregnant wife live in my home, rent-free, for 14 months, while I buried my husband. I assumed foolishly. I'll grant you that 2 adults living in a house they didn't pay for might think to be grateful, or might at least ask whose room they were taking before they handed me the keys to the small one. That assumption was my only mistake. The taking was entirely yours. So was the debt. So was the plan to manage me out 1 room at a time. None of that is mine to carry. It was just a bedroom, she said. I know, I said. That's rather the whole problem. You looked at a woman who'd just buried her husband and saw a logistics issue and a refinance. You only ever saw the house. You never once saw the woman who owned it. Sloane's mother started to speak. She'd come, of course. Missing it would have looked worse than attending, and I turned to her just once. You taught her how to look at people, I said quietly. I'd sit this one out. She sat it out. And then my son finally spoke. When his voice came, it cracked the way it had when he was small. "I let her do it," he said. "Mom, you're right. I let all of it happen. The chair, the pictures. I sat at that kitchen table and planned out loud how to get you used to one room. And I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway, because I was scared about the money, and it was easier than the truth." He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I did to you exactly what I've done my whole life. I chose easy. And I was going to let it cost you your home to cover a debt I was too much of a coward to tell you about. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I let him cry. Sometimes that's the whole job of being a mother. You let them cry, and you don't rush it, and you don't fix it too fast. When he could speak again, he asked, "How are you so calm?" "Because the house was always mine, Mark," I said. "Because nothing precious was actually lost here today, except some illusions, and those needed losing. And because being calm is the only weapon I've ever found that the people who try to move you out of your own life cannot argue with." Then I told them what came next, because mercy and consequence can sit at the same table, and I'd raised my son well enough, once, to know the difference. "Here's how it goes," I said. "I'm selling. I'll buy something small and right-sized in my name, and I'll be very comfortable in it. The baby's trust is funded and locked. Your son will have what his grandfather meant for him, and the two of you will never spend it on yourselves, which is precisely the point. The Voss debt is yours. I won't pay it, because the surest way to keep a person drowning is to keep pulling them out of water they jumped into on purpose. What I'll do is this. You have 7 weeks before I move enough to find a place of your own and stand up in it. I'll cover the deposit on a rental, first and last month. A real start. I'll help you carry every box. What I won't do is hand you a house or catch you one more time. Catching you is exactly how we all ended up in this kitchen." Sloane opened her mouth to argue about the deposit, I think, which tells you she still hadn't understood a word. And Mark, my quiet son, finally did the thing he'd never once done in their marriage. He put his hand over hers and said, "Sloane, don't. Not one more word." And she, for the first time since I'd known her, closed her mouth and kept it closed. It had taken selling a house out from under him to grow my son a spine. But there it was. Better late. Here's how it shook out in the months after, because I know you want the ledger and not just the feeling. And I've always believed in a clean ledger. The house closed on time. The Okonkwo's moved in with their 2 little ones, and the day after, the young father texted me a photo, his oldest, sliding down Ray's banister, mid-laugh. I sat in the parking lot of my new place and cried over it for 10 minutes. The good kind. Ray's banister has a child on it again. That's worth more than the sale price. I bought a small 2-bedroom across town, all on 1 floor, with a garden out back and a porch that catches the morning sun. It's in my name. It will only ever be in my name. The first thing I did was hang Mark's growing up pictures back on the wall and set a chair where Ray's recliner would have gone. Some mornings I take my coffee on that porch and tell Ray about my day, the way I do. It's the right size for one woman who knows exactly whose home it is. Keep the house in your name, Nell. I did, my love. To the very end, I did. The baby's trust is locked and growing, doing quietly for my grandson exactly what Ray intended. The boy came on a cold Tuesday, furious about it, with his grandfather's exact frown. The first time they laid him in my arms, I had to sit down. "There you are," I whispered. "We've been saving up for you a long time, little man." The Voss debt forced the reckoning. I wouldn't pay to spare them. With no house to refinance and no inheritance to borrow against, Mark and Sloane faced the number, the ordinary way, a payment plan, a second job for Mark. A great deal of swallowed pride. Hard, but theirs. People don't learn to swim while someone keeps lifting them out of the pool. Sloane and I will never be close, and I've made my peace with that. But the chorus of concerned texts evaporated the moment. There was a clean cognitive report and a locked trust to run into. You don't bring a capacity case against a woman holding a doctor's letter and a deed. For a good while, she stayed exactly who she'd been at that table. She told the cousins I'd robbed my own grandson of his home. She didn't speak to me at the hospital when the baby came, just handed him to Mark and looked through me like glass. She never fully apologized. She isn't built for it, and I stopped waiting for the words. But people are slow, not fixed. A few months ago, she asked me, in a small voice, to help her hang the pictures in their rental, the way you do, so they're level. I said yes. We hung a whole hallway of them, and she didn't say one word about aesthetics. It's a start. Mark is the one who changed the most. Grief and shame and fear did to him in one fortnight. What 40 years of comfort never. Could they grew him a backbone? He came to my porch about a month after the close, alone, and sat with his coffee a long while before he spoke. I keep landing on the same thing, he finally said. I didn't fail you when I told you to take the guest room. I've failed you 100 times before that, every time I let her move one of your things and said nothing. Every month I hid the Voss thing and let you think we were fine. The guest room was just the one I couldn't unsee. That's a hard thing to know about yourself, and I told him so. He keeps Ray's old tape measure on his keyring now, and he's learning, on purpose, to choose the right thing over the easy one. I'm not good at it yet, he said, but I'm doing it on purpose now. That's new, and I'm proud of him. Better late. My sister Joanne and I are closer than we've been since we were girls. A few of the cousins who'd joined the concerned chorus called to apologize, the embarrassed kind that comes too late to mean much but still counts for something. I accepted, and quietly noted who never called at all. People ask me sometimes whether it was too drastic listing the house the very next morning before I'd even finished my coffee, before I'd talked it through. Couldn't I have just had a conversation? I had conversations for 14 months. Conversations are what they count on. They'll let you talk forever, as long as you keep getting smaller, as long as you keep agreeing to move to the next room down. Talking is how they walk you all the way to the guest room, one reasonable sentence at a time. The morning I picked up the phone instead of starting another conversation was the morning I stopped getting smaller. If there's one thing I'd hand you, it's this. Your home and the room you take up in your own life is not up for a family vote. Never move into the guest room of your own life to make someone else comfortable. Check the deed. Your name is on it. It's yours. That's my story. One guest room, one steady no, one house with only my name on it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.